A security guard's voice cracked through the fluorescent-lit hallway like a warning shot. "Sir, you can't be back here. Step away from the door before I call for removal." The man he was speaking to didn't move. He simply pressed his palm once, lightly against the glass of room 12, as if steadying himself against an earthquake only he could feel. The guard shifted boots, scraping tile one hand, drifting toward the radio at his hip. I said, "Step back. This wing is for family only." But the man didn't flinch. His name was Samuel Wright, though no one here bothered to ask. His coat was old, the kind that had seen too many winters, and the shirt beneath it hung loose on his frame. To everyone in this small Massachusetts hospital, he looked like a tired blue-collar worker who'd wandered into the wrong corridor. But the way his shoulders rose and fell said something different. Heavy breaths, a quiet storm gathering in his chest. Behind the glass, an elderly woman lay unconscious, her breathing shallow, a tangle of tubes crossing her frail body. The machines beside her hummed with indifferent precision. That woman no one knew had once carried Samuel on her back when his legs were too weak from childhood asthma to walk home. She was the only voice who'd ever told him he mattered before the world agreed. And now a guard half his age blocked him like he was a trespasser in his own life. The camera of the mind would move closer, catching the flicker in Samuel's eyes, the quick tightening at the corners. Not anger, restraint. A man measuring how much of himself he could reveal without breaking everything open. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. The guard let out a dry laugh. "Everyone thinks their story is different. Rules don't change just because you talk soft. Move." Down the hallway, a nurse glanced their way, but quickly looked off. Not out of cruelty. Out of exhaustion. Out of the belief so common and so wrong that you can understand a man by the price of the jacket on his back. Samuel stepped away from the glass at last, but only to inhale slowly. The air stung, cleaning chemicals recycled heat to spare. Then he asked, "Who decides who belongs in this wing?" The guard shrugged. "Hospital administration. People above my pay grade, and definitely above yours." Samuel's jaw shifted, just a fraction, but enough for the guard to stiffen, suddenly unsure why a simple question carried the weight of a courtroom oath. Samuel's voice remained even. "So you're certain I don't belong here? You think I'd be standing here if you did?" The guard snapped. A beat. Long and sharp. Then the elevator dinged at the far end of the corridor. Out stepped a woman in her 40s, power walking in heels that announced her rank before anyone read her badge. Margaret Doyle, Chief Administrative Officer of the hospital, efficient to the bone. Brilliant, and tonight tired in a way she didn't show. Her eyes scanned the hallway, the way seasoned leaders do, counting doors, staff problems before they become fires. She reached the guard and Samuel, and nodded courteously at the guard, before turning her attention not to Samuel, but to her tablet. "What's the issue this man is trying to access?" "Room 12, the guard said. Margaret did not look up. "Family only." "Escort him out, please." Samuel watched her for a long second, the way she held her tablet like a shield, the way her hair, neatly pinned, loosened slightly above one ear, a sign she'd been called in after hours. He saw more than she meant to show. He always did. "I need 5 minutes," he said. Margaret finally looked at him, and for a heartbeat something flashed across her eyes. Not recognition, not exactly, but a strange tug of familiarity, as though she'd met him in another life, or perhaps another version of this one. She straightened. "Sir, I understand this is difficult, but the patient in that room is in critical condition. Only approved relatives I know her condition, Samuel said quietly. Margaret paused, confused by the certainty in his tone. Then you understand. I understand better than you think. His voice wasn't loud, but the corridor seemed to shrink around it. A nurse farther down stopped walking, sensing tension rising like heat off asphalt. Margaret's patience thinned. We have protocols. I can't bend them because you feel protocols, Samuel repeated as if tasting the word. Tell me, do those protocols include leaving a patient unattended for 15 minutes because your night nurse is covering 2 wings, or the shortage that forced you to understaff emergency last weekend, or the report sent to your board warning of violations in these upper floors? Her spine stiffened. A subtle involuntary reaction, the kind that appears when someone speaks a truth they should not know. How do you know about that? She asked carefully. Samuel didn't answer. Not with words, just a measured look that travelled from her eyes to her badge, then back. Slow, deliberate, a warning she didn't yet understand. The guard stepped forward defensive. I said back away, or Margaret raised a hand, stopping him. Something was shifting, a sense, small but growing, that the man in front of her was not simply a distressed visitor. His posture was too controlled, his knowledge too precise, his calm too unnatural for the moment. She softened her tone a degree. Sir, if you have legitimate authority to be here, tell me. We can verify immediately. I will, Samuel said. But not out here. Margaret studied him. The tired coat, the worn shoes, the steady eyes that did not match either. A contradiction wrapped in a contradiction. And in her hesitation, fear crept in, not of danger, but of being wrong, of misjudging a man the way institutions often do. The air grew heavy again, thick with unsaid things. Sir, she tried again. Who exactly are you? Samuel exhaled, a quiet release like a man opening an old wound. He did not answer her question. Instead, he glanced once more toward room 12. His voice, when it returned, held the weight of an oath. I'm here because that woman has been failed more times than anyone in this building will ever admit. And tonight I'm done watching from the sidelines. Margaret felt the shift before she understood it. Something tectonic pulling loose under their feet. She swallowed. If you don't step back, I'll have no choice but to call security headquarters. Then call them, Samuel said. They've been waiting for my arrival since 7:15. Her brows drew in. 7:15. Waited for him. That was impossible. Unless a cold, electric thought flickered through her mind. One she pushed away immediately because it made no sense. Yet his calm, his knowledge, his certainty, the guard's radio crackled suddenly. Command to all units. Be advised that the incoming oversight representative has arrived on site. Repeat, oversight representative is now in the building. Confirm identity before engaging. Margaret's blood ran cold. Oversight. The new Federal Review Team. The one the board whispered about behind closed doors. The one with power to audit, suspend, even restructure entire hospital networks. She looked at Samuel, and for the first time truly saw him. He held her gaze unblinking. We're not done here, he said softly. The guard's hand fell away from his radio. The hallway went silent, but for the soft, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor behind the glass. Margaret Doyle, who had commanded hospitals through blizzards, outbreaks, and budget wars, felt something unfamiliar press against her throat. Not fear. Reckoning. Samuel stepped closer, not threatening, but with the calm authority of someone who had carried more weight than anyone realized. Now he said, Let's talk about who belongs in this wing." And the world she thought she controlled began to tilt beneath her feet. The silence after Samuel's words did not break. It fractured. A thin crack running the length of the hallway as Margaret searched his face for any hint of exaggeration, any clue that this was a misunderstanding. But there was nothing to find. His expression held no triumph, no threat, only inevitability, as if he had expected resistance long before he arrived. A shift of weight echoed from the guard beside her. His boots scraped the floor, the sound sharp and nervous. He looked from Samuel to Margaret, waiting for direction. She breathed in slowly, steadying her voice before it betrayed the sudden tightening in her chest. "Sir," she said carefully, "if you're claiming affiliation with the oversight team, I need verification immediately." "You'll have it," Samuel replied, "once we get off this hallway. This isn't a conversation you want echoed in front of staff." Something in the way he said staff carried a note she couldn't place. It wasn't dismissal. It was knowledge deep and heavy, like someone who understood their routines, their workload, their fears. It unsettled her more than his stillness. Before she could speak again, the elevator 2 corridors down opened with a soft, metallic sigh. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the area with deliberate precision. Their posture was unmistakable federal, not private. The kind of trained neutrality that comes from years of operating in rooms where every word must be measured. Margaret froze. She recognized the emblem on the badge clipped to the belt of the taller one. Office of Healthcare Compliance and Oversight. The agency hospitals whispered about when budgets were stretched or patient complaints piled up. The group that could suspend entire departments with a single ruling. The taller agent spotted Samuel first. His stride lengthened, a small but respectful nod. "Mr. Wright," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Our apologies for the delay. Traffic on Route 7 slowed our arrival." Route 7. The detail landed like a stone in Margaret's stomach. A detail Samuel had not spoken, yet one they believed he would be familiar with. Not as a patient, not as a visitor, but as someone in command. The agent turned toward her with a polite professionalism that felt like judgment, disguised as courtesy. "Ms. Doyle will need a private conference room, now preferably." Her throat went dry. "Conference room B is open." "Good," the agent said, then stepped aside for Samuel, not leading, allowing him to lead. The guard, suddenly pale, stepped backwards without being asked. But Samuel didn't move. His eyes were back on room 12, where the frail woman lay under the wash of sterile light. For a moment, the rest of the hallway disappeared. The agents, the guard, even Margaret. The entire world narrowed to one door and the life behind it. Margaret followed his gaze. Her voice softened just slightly. "She's stable for now. The night team is watching her closely." The line trembled. Samuel heard it, saw it. He didn't call it out. Instead, he let silence hold the truth she wasn't yet ready to admit. "Conference room," he said quietly. "Then I'm coming back." Margaret nodded. She felt stripped of every assumption she'd made in the last 10 minutes. They walked together down the corridor. The agents followed with silent steps. The guard stayed behind, pressing 2 fingers to his temple, as if steadying himself after a blow that hadn't touched him physically, but landed all the same. The conference room was small, the kind used for patient consultations or quiet arguments between doctors and administrators. The lights hummed, the heater clicked, everything normal and familiar. Yet the air felt tight, like too many truths had crowded into too little space. Samuel stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He didn't take a seat. Neither did the agents. Margaret remained standing, unsure whether sitting would look weak or presumptuous. One of the agents finally broke the tension. "Miss Doyle, you were informed last quarter that your hospital system was entering Phase 1 review. That includes unannounced site evaluations." "Yes," she said, her voice steadying. "But I was told the reviewers would initiate contact directly with me." "That was the plan," the agent replied. Then concerns escalated. Her fingers tightened around the folder she hadn't realized she was still holding. "What concerns?" The agent exchanged a brief look with Samuel. "Not asking permission. Confirming readiness. The ones you lived through," Samuel said. She felt the words more than heard them. They hit hard, because they came from someone who had not stood in her meetings, yet spoke as if he had. He continued, the shortage that doubled nurse loads, the delays in emergency intake, the malfunctioning monitors that went unrepaired for 3 weeks, the family complaints that never reached the board because middle management filtered them out. Her breath caught. She had tried to fix those issues, fought, pleaded, escalated, but she was only one administrator in a system drowning under rising costs and shrinking staff. She carried guilt for every failure, but she had believed those failures were hers alone to bear. "How do you know these things?" she whispered. Samuel stepped closer, the room dimming around his silhouette. "Because this hospital isn't just under review, Ms. Doyle. It's under receivership consideration." Her heart stumbled at the word. Receivership. A total takeover, loss of administrative control, loss of autonomy. She swallowed. Hard. "That decision hasn't been finalized," one agent added, "but the recommendation is being drafted." Margaret turned to Samuel, as if he were the only steady point in a spinning room. "And what is your role in all this?" Samuel didn't rush his answer. He let the question settle, let her feel the gravity of it. Then he said, "I'm chief auditor for the Federal Receivership Unit, and this hospital is one of my cases." Margaret went still. Her pulse stuttered, the worn coat, the quiet manner, the knowledge no visitor should have. It all aligned in a way she hadn't considered, because she hadn't dared to. The agent spoke again. "Mr. Wright is here to confirm whether corrective action is possible before the receivership order moves forward." Samuel held her gaze, unblinking. "I tried to start this conversation quietly, respectfully. But your staff didn't give me that choice." The guard's words echoed back at her. "People above your pay grade, definitely above yours." How wrong that boy had been. Margaret found her voice again, soft but stable. "If I had known who you were—" "That's the point," Samuel interrupted. "You weren't supposed to know. I wanted to see this place the way real people see it, the ones who don't wear badges or titles." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "I didn't come to punish this hospital," he said. "I came because someone in room 12 deserves better than what she's getting. And she's not the only one." Margaret's eyes stung, not from fear, but recognition of every truth she'd tried to shoulder alone. "What happens next?" she asked. "Next," Samuel said, "you walk me through every wing of this building and you don't hide a thing. After that, we talk about the future." "The future of the hospital?" she asked. Samuel's expression shifted. Not harsh, not soft, determined. "The future of everyone under this roof." He opened the door. The hallway waited, washed in harsh light. Margaret followed the weight of a new reality, pressing gently but unmistakably onto her shoulders. Not ruin. Not yet. But reckoning. And maybe if she handled this right renewal. Samuel didn't look back as he walked toward room 12 again. He didn't need to. The agents moved behind him like shadows cast by the truth he carried. And for the first time that night, Margaret Doyle understood the man they'd nearly escorted out of the building was here not to destroy her hospital, but to determine whether it deserved saving at all. The hallway outside room 12 seemed narrower when Samuel returned, as if the walls had shifted inward under the pressure of what had just been revealed. The guard who had blocked him earlier stood, rigid hands clasped behind his back, now eyes fixed on a scuffed patch of linoleum. Shame clung to him like a second uniform. Samuel didn't pause or acknowledge him, not out of cruelty, but because the man was already living through his own internal correction. Inside the room, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor greeted him like an old and fragile friend. The elderly woman on the bed, Josephine Wright, lay motionless beneath thin blankets. The years had carved deep lines across her face, yet her presence still carried the quiet authority of someone who had raised children on grit and prayer. The overhead light cast soft shadows along her cheekbones, giving her the look of someone caught between this world and another. Samuel took a slow breath and stepped closer to her bedside. He rested 2 fingers gently on the side rail, grounding himself in metal and memory. Behind him, Margaret lingered at the threshold, unsure if she was intruding or invited. "She can't hear you now," she said softly. Samuel didn't turn. "You don't know her." A beat passed. Margaret lowered her eyes. "No, I don't." He pulled the visitor's chair closer and sat the old vinyl creaking under his weight. His hands came together, thumbs tapping lightly, a habit he'd picked up in college when studying through sleepless nights. He watched Josephine's face, carefully, as though searching for traces of the woman who'd raised him. "There was a winter," he said, quietly, when the pipes froze in our apartment. She wrapped my sister and me in blankets, sat between us, and kept us warm all night, while the temperature inside dropped close to freezing. She didn't sleep. She just held us upright, whispering stories until daylight. Margaret felt the words settle in the air, heavier than any policy or administrative burden she'd carried. She gave everything she had, Samuel continued, even when it wasn't enough, even when the world told her she was asking for too much. So when I called for help last week, and the nurse put me on hold for 5 minutes before telling me someone would call back tomorrow, I knew something was wrong here. Margaret's shoulders tightened. "I didn't know about that call." "I know you didn't," Samuel said. "But someone did. And they chose to place it in a pile on a desk instead of treating it like a life." He stood suddenly, the chair scraping against the tile. His height filled the room in a way that made Margaret instinctively step back. Not out of fear, out of understanding. "This review isn't about punishing people," he said. "It's about accountability." She met his gaze. "And you think I'm standing in the way of that accountability?" "No," Samuel replied, surprising her. "I think you've been trying to fix a dam long after the cracks were too deep. I've read your reports. I know your fights with upper management. I know what you've been asking for. And who's been ignoring you?" Margaret swallowed hard. "Then why does this feel like I'm the one on trial?" "Because," Samuel said calmly, "you care. And when someone who cares is confronted with failure, even failure not of their own making, it feels like a verdict." She sank into the chair by the wall, rubbing her temples. The fluorescent lights flickered, once humming, with a tiredness that mirrored her own. "You have to understand, She said this place wasn't supposed to fall apart. We had budget cuts, yes, staffing shortages, aging equipment. But we kept trying every day we tried, Samuel nodded. And now you'll show me exactly where the system breaks, every floor, every wing. Margaret looked up sharply. Tonight it's nearly 9. Patients don't stop needing care because it's dark, he said. Neither do the problems. A knock interrupted them. The shorter of the 2 federal agents entered, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "Mr. Wright, we have an issue downstairs." Samuel straightened. "What kind of issue?" The agent's jaw tightened before he answered. "A patient's family is demanding to see the on-call physician. The doctor hasn't shown up. Staff can't locate him. Security is escalating." Margaret's face drained of color. "Please tell me it's not Henderson." "It's Henderson," the agent replied. Again. Samuel's expression didn't change, but the air around him did. It sharpened. Margaret hurried to explain, speaking quickly, as if rushing to soften the blow. "Dr. Henderson is brilliant, truly. But he's been struggling, overworked. He covers double shifts, sometimes triple. He promised tonight wouldn't be an issue." "Yet here we are," Samuel said. The agent stepped closer. "There's more. The family downstairs is recording the confrontation. This might go viral." Margaret pressed a hand to her forehead. "God, not this week." Samuel's voice dropped into something colder. "This is what I need to see. Real time. Real consequences." Margaret hesitated. "You want to walk into that. I want to see what patients see." There was no room to argue. She moved to the door, paused once to glance back at Josephine. "Should we call someone to sit with her?" Samuel shook his head. "She's never been afraid of being alone." He didn't add the rest, that it was the world that had always been afraid of her strength, not the other way around. They left the room, the hallway brighter now, louder somehow. Nurses moved quickly, whispers rising like gusts of wind. Everyone sensed something unfolding, though none of them knew the scale. As they walked toward the elevator, Margaret spoke under her breath. "If this blows up online, the board will panic. They'll blame me." "They already do," Samuel replied. "But tonight isn't about them." "Then who is it about?" He didn't answer until the elevator door slid open and the 3 of them stepped inside. "It's about the people who don't get to write reports or sit in strategy meetings," he said. "It's about the quiet ones, the forgotten ones, the ones who show up at hospitals terrified, hoping someone sees them as more than a name on a chart." The agent pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator hummed downward. "And what about you?" Margaret asked softly. Where do you fit in that Samuel's reflection in the silver elevator door stared back at him? Older, sharper around the edges. A man who had learned the hard way that authority means nothing if the people under it remain unseen. "I come from them," he said, "and I don't forget where I come from." The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Noise hit them instantly, raised voices, a child crying, a man shouting for someone to explain why his father hadn't been seen yet. Nurses trying, failing to calm a rising tide of frustration. Samuel stepped out first, eyes scanning the scene like a battlefield strategist. He turned to Margaret. "Let's begin." The night wasn't over, and the real reckoning hadn't even started. Chaos hit Samuel like heat from an open furnace the moment he stepped into the waiting area. Voices clashed. A man in his 50s shouted over the front desk counter. Palms pressed flat knuckles, whitening as frustration pulsed through him. A teenage girl wiped tears from her cheeks with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. A small boy tugged at her arm, confused and scared. The air tasted like anger and antiseptic, thick enough to choke on. Margaret moved forward quickly, voice steadying into the tone administrators learned out of necessity. "So please, lower your voice. We're here to help." "What seems to be the issue?" the man snapped around. His eyes were bloodshot, full of fear, sharpened into rage. "My father has been waiting over an hour. He can't breathe, he can barely sit up, and your nurse told me the doctor on call is unavailable." Unavailable. My father isn't a package waiting on a shelf. He's dying. The teenage girl beside him swallowed a sob. "Please, we just need someone. Anyone." Margaret turned toward the nearest nurse, a young woman with trembling hands who looked like she'd already worked 13 hours straight. "Where is Dr. Henderson?" The nurse braced herself, pushing stray hair behind her ear. "We've paged him 3 times. No response. We think he left the building. Again." Margaret's expression tightened in a way Samuel recognized immediately, not anger at the nurse, but the crushing pressure of responsibility without power. The weight of being blamed for fires you didn't start, but were expected to extinguish. Before Margaret could speak again, Samuel stepped forward. Not fast, not aggressive, simply present in a way that pulled every eye in the room toward him. "What's your father's name?" he asked the man. The man blinked, surprised anyone had addressed him with calm instead of procedure. "Richard. Richard Harlow. And what are his symptoms?" "Shortness of breath. Tightness. He's had heart trouble before." Samuel nodded once and turned to the nurse. "Where is he?" "Room 6, she replied, voice small. Samuel looked at Margaret next. "Page whoever else is credentialed to evaluate cardiac distress. I don't care if they're supposed to be off tonight. Bring them in. That violates scheduling policy," Margaret whispered urgently. "Protocol isn't helping this man," Samuel said. "Real people don't bleed on schedules." Before she could reply, another voice shot through the room. "Hey, who do you think you are giving orders?" A man in a plaid jacket stood near the vending machines, arms crossed, expression sour with entitlement. "This is a hospital. You can't just walk in here and play hero." Margaret stiffened, ready to intervene, but Samuel raised a hand, slightly permission, to let the moment breathe. He stepped toward the man, stopping only when they stood a foot apart. His voice was low, steady, and carried weight that didn't require volume. "I am someone who listens before shouting," Samuel said. "You should try it." A ripple of murmurs spread. The man in plaid bristled, but something in Samuel's eyes, cold resolve mixed with unnerving clarity, made him back down. The teenage girl near the front desk wiped new tears away. "Please," she whispered, "someone just help my grandpa." Samuel changed direction instantly. He moved through the waiting area as though he'd walked this floor 1,000 times. Margaret followed, shaken by the authority in his stride. The agents trailed behind them, silent, absorbing every detail. When they reached room 6, the door hung halfway open. Inside, an elderly man sat slumped in a chair, breaths labored and shallow. His chest rose unevenly, each inhale a battle he was losing. Samuel knelt beside him, close enough that his voice reached the man without traveling far. "Mr. Harlow, my name is Samuel. We're going to take care of you." The man's eyelids fluttered, recognition faint but present. "You with the hospital?" Samuel didn't answer the question. He placed a hand gently on the man's shoulder, grounding him. "Can you describe the pain?" Samuel asked. "Feels like a fist sitting on my chest, radiating to your arm." A nod. "Weak? Frightened?" Samuel stood and turned sharply. "We need an EKG now, and nitroglycerin on standby." The nurse at the doorway jolted into motion. Yes, sir. Margaret watched the scene unfold and felt something deep inside her shift, a realization sharp enough to carve through doubt. Samuel didn't just know policy. He didn't just know systems. He knew medicine, not from the outside, from experience. She stepped closer, voice quiet. You're clinically trained. Samuel didn't look at her. Once. A long time ago. Why did you leave? Because medicine can heal bodies, he said, but it can't fix a system that keeps breaking them. The nurses arrived with equipment. Samuel stepped aside, letting them work, but remained near enough that the family saw him first when they rushed in. The teenage girl rushed to her grandfather's side. Grandpa, we're here. Samuel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He's in the right hands now. The girl looked up at him, searching for answers deeper than the moment required. Are you somebody important? Samuel offered a small, restrained smile. Not tonight. Tonight I'm just here to make sure he gets what he deserves. The father, chest heaving from earlier shouting, approached Samuel with raw gratitude, struggling to find words. Thank you, he said. I'm sorry if I yelled before. Samuel nodded. You weren't yelling at me. You were yelling at fear. The room softened then, just slightly. Enough for Hope to breathe. Margaret stepped out into the hall, motioning for Samuel to join her. When you walk into a room, she said quietly, everyone reacts. Nurses, patients, even me. Why, Samuel met her eyes with a calm she hadn't seen since the night began. People respond to certainty, Ms. Doyle. Especially when everything around them is falling apart. You could have been a physician, a leader. You could have, I am a leader, Samuel cut in gently. Just not the kind this hospital expected. She exhaled shakily. You realize the board isn't going to treat this lightly. The oversight review, your involvement, the possibility of receivership, this will shake every inch of this building. Good, Samuel said. It needs shaking. A commotion rose at the far end of the hall. Another nurse hurried toward them, breathless eyes wide. We found Dr. Henderson, she said. He was asleep in his car. He claims exhaustion. Security wants direction. Margaret's shoulders sagged. Not tonight, she murmured. Samuel's expression hardened, not with anger, but with the cold, crushing disappointment reserved for people who should know better. Bring him in, Samuel said. We'll talk to him. Margaret hesitated. He's a good man. Overworked, burned out. The system broke him. I'm not here to break him further, Samuel replied. I'm here to find out whether he still cares enough to do the job he signed his name to. When Henderson arrived, led by security, his steps were uneven. His scrubs were wrinkled, his hair matted with sweat. He looked not like a villain, but a man crushed beneath invisible weight. Dr. Henderson, Samuel said calmly, You missed an emergency. Henderson's eyes were haunted. I know. I couldn't keep my eyes open. I haven't slept more than 4 hours in 3 days. Samuel studied him. Then why didn't you call for backup? Henderson laughed bitterly. Who? The one other doctor covering 2 wards. The locum who left last week. You think I'm proud of this? You think I don't hate myself for it? The hallway thickened with silence. Samuel spoke softly. Then help me fix this place. Tell me everything. Henderson blinked confusion, overtaking despair. Fix it. How Samuel stepped closer. By telling the truth. The full truth. What's breaking this hospital isn't bad people. It's broken systems pretending to function. Henderson sank into a chair, covering his face with both hands. I can tell you everything he whispered. I just don't know if it will change anything. Samuel crouched, slightly leveling his gaze. It will. Because you're not telling it to administration. You're telling it to the man who can tear this place down to the studs and rebuild it." Margaret's breath caught. Dr. Henderson's eyes widened, and the first real tremor of understanding rippled through the room. They finally realized who Samuel Wright truly was, and what he had come to do. Dr. Henderson's confession began not with words, but with the slow unraveling of a man who had carried too much for too long. His hands trembled as he lowered them from his face, revealing eyes rimmed red and swollen, the kind that belonged to someone who had been apologizing to himself in silence for months, maybe years. He looked at Samuel as though searching for permission to finally break. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he said, voice strained, but honest. "I thought I could hold the seams together until help arrived, but help never came." The hallway, once loud and frantic, now felt almost reverent. Nurses moved quietly, as though afraid a raised voice might shatter the fragile truth about to spill from him. Margaret stood at a careful distance, as if stepping closer would intrude on a confession not meant for administrative ears. Yet her eyes were fixed entirely on Henderson, listening as a colleague, not an overseer. Samuel remained still, posture steady, his expression offering neither comfort nor condemnation. Only space. Space for truth. "What happened tonight?" Samuel asked. Henderson let out a fractured breath. "I got the page. I saw it. But my body..." His voice cracked. He pressed a fist to his chest. "It just wouldn't move. I wasn't asleep, not fully. I was trapped between exhaustion and panic. I thought if I closed my eyes for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, I could pull myself back together." His voice dropped into something barely audible. "I woke up 40 minutes later." Margaret shut her eyes. Samuel did not. "What about last month?" Samuel asked. "When you missed 2 rapid responses." Henderson flinched. "I was covering 3 wings that night. 3. 1 doctor for 77 patients. 77. He held up shaking fingers as if counting ghosts. "You can't be in 3 places at once. So someone always gets missed." Margaret forced herself to speak. "Why didn't you tell us? Why not come to me?" "You know I would have escalated." Henderson let out a hollow laugh. "Escalated to who? The board. The same board that cut our emergency staffing by 30%. The same board that rejected every proposal you made because it wasn't cost-effective." His eyes softened with apology. "I didn't go to you because I knew what they'd say. Do more with less." That phrase is killing people, Margaret. Literally. The words hit harder than any accusation. Margaret gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Samuel stepped closer. "Why didn't you resign?" Henderson lifted his weary gaze. "Because I love this work. I love these patients. I love being the one they trust when everything is falling apart. But somewhere along the line, I became part of a machine that eats good doctors alive." A long silence stretched taut as a violin string. Then Henderson whispered, "I thought I could save everyone." "You can't," Samuel said quietly. "No one can. But you can tell the truth. And that's where saving starts." Henderson nodded as tears gathered at the edges of his eyes. "Then ask what you need. I'll tell you everything." Samuel turned, slightly addressing both him and Margaret. "Tonight isn't about assigning blame. It's about revealing reality. People think hospitals fall because of bad actors. That's rarely true. They fall because everyone is drowning, silently hoping someone else will call for help." Margaret's voice wavered. "I tried. God, I tried." Samuel's tone softened, but remained firm. "I know. But trying privately isn't enough anymore." Before Margaret could respond, the shorter federal agent approached, his expression tense. Mr. Wright, we have another situation. Samuel straightened. Go ahead. A patient in the transitional ward collapsed. The monitor didn't alarm. Staff only caught it because a CNA walked by. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. No, not again. Samuel's eyes hardened, a silent fury, rising like a tide held back by steel discipline. Malfunctioning equipment, the agent nodded. Same unit reported 2 weeks ago. Tagged for replacement, but never ordered. Margaret whispered. The board denied the requisition. Samuel inhaled sharply, not out of surprise but exhaustion, at a truth too familiar. Show me. They moved quickly through the corridor past nurses, who sensed the shifting energy but could not name it. Past patients whose fates hung in fragile balance. Past bulletin boards filled with posters about compassion and safety messages that rang hollow in the fluorescent light. The transitional ward was dim, the overhead bulbs humming weakly. A woman in her 70s lay pale on her bed. Oxygen mask secured her breaths, shallow but steady now. A young CNA stood by the bed hands, clasped tightly, eyes wide with lingering shock. She looked at Samuel as though unsure if she'd done something heroic or merely prevented the inevitable. What happened? Samuel asked. The CNA swallowed. I was doing rounds. I heard I don't know something felt off. She looked grey. The monitor didn't beep. Samuel approached the monitor. Its screen flickered, lagging a beat behind the woman's heartbeat. How long has this unit been faulty? The CNA hesitated, glancing at Margaret before answering. Weeks. Maybe more. Margaret stepped in, voice strained with regret. We reported it. We asked for replacements. They said the budget didn't allow for it. Samuel's jaw clenched. The budget didn't allow for survival. He turned, slightly addressing the room, but directing the weight of his words at a system larger than any individual within it. This is what happens when hospitals are run like corporations, when numbers matter more than people, when staff scream into the void and hope someone with authority listens. Margaret stepped forward. Her voice, though cracked, held steel. Then listen, now. Tell me what you want. Tell me what to do. Because if we keep going like this, people will die. And I won't be the administrator who stays silent. Samuel looked at her. Really looked. For the first time tonight, he saw not an overwhelmed administrator, but a leader standing at the edge of collapse, refusing to fall backward. Good, he said. Then let's start with truth. Full truth. Every neglected request, every ignored report, every shortcut forced by budget cuts. Bring them all. Margaret's breath trembled, but she nodded. I will. And after that, Samuel added, we fix this place from the ground up. A nurse at the nurses' station overheard the last sentence and turned curiosity, flaring across her tired features. Fix it. How Samuel faced her, his presence filling the hallway with a quiet, commanding gravity. By reminding every person who walks these corridors that hospitals exist for people, not profit. And by holding accountable anyone who forgot that. The nurse blinked, stunned by the conviction in his voice. Henderson stepped forward, shoulders squared for the first time in months. Samuel, if receivership happens, what does that mean for us? For this hospital, Samuel answered without hesitation, a receivership isn't the end. It's a reset, new oversight, new funding, new leadership if necessary. It's not punishment. It's a promise that things will change. He paused, his voice lowering into something that held both warning and hope. But only hospitals that fight for their future survive it. Margaret looked around the ward. The flickering lights, the The worn floors, the exhausted faces. "We're worth saving," she whispered. "This place is worth saving." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then prove it. Tonight. Show me everything this hospital hides during daylight." She inhaled, gathering courage from somewhere deep, and motioned toward the far hallway. "Then you'd better follow me." Samuel turned to Henderson. "You as well. No more hiding behind exhaustion." Henderson nodded. No more hiding. As they moved together down the dim corridor, past rooms filled with whispered prayers and failing machinery, past nurses carrying both hope and despair. In equal measure, a quiet realization settled over the hospital like a shift in weather. Someone with power had finally come. Someone who wasn't afraid to break the system in order to rebuild it. And the night was far from over. The stairwell shook with the uneven rhythm of hurried footsteps as Margaret led Samuel and the others toward the lower floors. Pipes rattled behind the walls, each metallic groan echoing the strain of a building pushed past its limits. The air grew colder as they descended, the hum of machines fading into a deeper, heavier quiet. Samuel kept pace easily, eyes sharp, absorbing every detail like a man reconstructing a crime scene from memory alone. At the landing between floors, he paused. A faint sound rose through the concrete. Not voices, not machinery, something else. A trembling, irregular beeping, too soft, too distant, but unmistakably wrong. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Margaret stopped mid-step. What sound? Samuel started downward again. A monitor. Failing. Henderson inhaled sharply, instinct propelling him forward. Within moments they reached the basement-level diagnostic wing. The hallway lights flickered, one tube buzzing in protest every few seconds. The air held the damp chill of a place meant for storage rather than people. "Why is this wing lit?" Margaret murmured. "No one should be down here at this hour." Before she finished, a faint cry seeped through the crack beneath a door. Henderson lunged ahead and pushed the door open. A patient lay half off the exam table, oxygen tubing tangled around her arm, her face ghost pale. A lone monitor beside her spasmed with a glitching line, its beat scrambling between frantic and flat. A nursing assistant, barely 20, stood frozen near the wall, hands hovering uselessly in midair, her eyes wide with panic. I didn't know what to do," she stammered. "I found her like this. The monitor kept cutting out. I called upstairs, but no one answered." Henderson snapped into motion. "Get me a blood pressure cuff and oxygen. Now." His voice cracked through the air like a whip, bringing the assistant out of paralysis. Samuel steadied the patient's shoulders, guiding her slowly back onto the table. Her breaths came in thin, rasping pulls. "You're all right," he murmured. "Stay with me." Margaret hovered near the door, heartbeat pounding as she watched Henderson shift from defeated doctor to decisive commander. In a single breath, he reclaimed the part of himself the system had crushed. The assistant returned, fumbling with supplies. Henderson secured the cuff and checked vitals, his face tightening. "She's crashing. We need to move her upstairs." "Now! We're short on transport staff tonight," Margaret said, voice hollow. "Then we carry her," Henderson replied. Samuel lifted the woman's upper body with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so controlled. Henderson supported her legs, and together they maneuvered her into the hallway. The assistant rushed ahead, clearing space. The journey up the ramp toward the main floor felt endless. The woman's breath fluttered against Samuel's forearm, each exhale weaker than the last. Henderson murmured calming words, though his own hands trembled with fear of losing her. When they reached the elevator, Samuel lowered her briefly, so Henderson could adjust her position. The assistant punched the button repeatedly. The elevator did not come. Margaret shot forward and slapped the emergency call panel. "Come on," she whispered. Henderson's jaw tightened. "The elevators down here jam at night. Maintenance knows. The board knows. They won't approve the upgrades." The words were a quiet indictment. Samuel didn't hesitate. "We take the stairs." 6 flights, the assistant cried. With her, Samuel said. No one argued. The climb began slow, brutal, relentless. The woman shifted in their arms, groaning faintly. Henderson's breath grew ragged. Sweat trickled down his temple. Samuel held steady each step, as measured as a heartbeat. By the 3rd flight, Margaret shed her hools and carried equipment barefoot, the cold concrete numbing her feet as guilt gnawed deeper into her ribs. "She shouldn't be down in that wing," she said breathlessly. "No one told me patients were being kept there after hours." Samuel looked back at her eyes, dark and unyielding. "That's the problem, Margaret. You don't know what you aren't shown." They reached the 4th floor landing when the woman's body seized briefly in Samuel's arms. Henderson pressed his fingers to her neck. "Pulse is weak. We don't have much time." They pushed onward. On the 5th landing, a janitor stood blocking the doorway, mop in hand, startled by the sudden chaos. Samuel's voice cut through the air. "Move. Now." The man stepped aside instantly, eyes widening as the group thundered past. At last they reached the main floor. Nurses gasped when they saw Samuel and Henderson burst through the stairwell door with the patient. A bed was rushed forward. Within seconds, a team swarmed, attaching leads, adjusting oxygen, stabilizing the failing rhythm on the screen. Samuel stepped back, breathing hard, letting the professionals work. Henderson leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling, his exhaustion now overshadowed by raw adrenaline. Margaret wiped her palms on her skirt, trembling. "How many patients have been treated down there without my knowledge?" A nurse looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and fatigue. "Most of us knew, Mom. We tried to make do. We're out of rooms. We didn't want to bother administration again. Last time we did, we were told to stop complaining." Margaret closed her eyes. Her voice, when it came, cracked open. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Samuel stepped closer. "Intentions aren't enough. Results are what patients live or die by." Margaret met his stare. Shame and fear warred behind her eyes. "Tell me what to do. You don't fix this tonight," Samuel said. "You expose it." Before she could respond, the federal agent approached with a tablet in hand. "Mr. Wright, you need to see this." Samuel took the tablet. A live news feed appeared. A reporter stood outside the hospital entrance microphone, trembling slightly in the night wind. The headline, crawling across the bottom, read, "Local hospital faces mounting safety concerns amid staffing deficits." Margaret's breath hitched. How did they find out?" The agent answered grimly. "Someone leaked photos of patients waiting in hallways, of broken equipment. It's spreading fast." Henderson's shoulders sagged. "The board will blame us." "No," Samuel said, voice steady as steel. "They will answer for their choices." Tonight the truth reached daylight sooner than they wanted. But daylight was coming either way. Mr. Wright, the agent, added, "The department is asking for your recommendation. Immediate receivership or deferred review." The atmosphere thickened. Every breath in the room seemed to freeze. Margaret looked at Samuel, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we go into receivership tonight, what happens to all of us?" "To this hospital," Samuel didn't answer immediately. He looked around the exhausted nurses, the frightened staff, the patient fighting for breath down the hallway, the broken lights, the strained walls. Then he looked at Margaret. She stood barefoot, hair disheveled determination, pulsing through fatigue, like a heartbeat refusing to quit. "This place is broken," Samuel said softly. "But broken things can be rebuilt. What I need to know is whether the people inside it are worth rebuilding with." Henderson stepped forward, his voice steady for the first time. "I am." The young nursing assistant lifted her chin. "Me too." The janitor, who had stepped aside on the stairs, quiet until now, spoke from the doorway. "We all are." One by one, voices rose, a chorus of weary resolve. Margaret swallowed hard. "Samuel, I will fight for this hospital, not to save my job, to save these people." Samuel held her gaze for a long, weighty moment. Then he nodded once. "Then let's see if this place deserves a second chance." As the night deepened, the hospital braced itself. Receivership wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A cold gust rolled through the automatic doors as Samuel stepped out into the parking lot, the night air thick with the metallic taste of coming rain. Emergency lights from an arriving ambulance painted the asphalt in pulses of red and white. He stood still, hands in the pockets of his worn coat, as if anchoring himself before the next storm. Margaret followed a step behind, arms wrapped around her torso, not from cold, but from the weight of everything she had learned tonight. The agents lingered near the entrance, speaking quietly into their radios. Their clipped tones carried urgency, the kind that meant decisions were already being weighed far beyond these hospital walls. But Samuel's gaze was fixed on a figure sitting alone on the curb at the far end of the lot. Dr. Henderson. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the pavement, as if reading something written there in a language only guilt understands. The trembling fluorescent street lamp above him cast his shadow in fractured lines. Margaret hesitated. "Should we give him a minute?" "No," Samuel said. Time is what broke him, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to step in. Time's done enough damage. They crossed the lot. Henderson didn't look up until their footsteps reached him. His voice was low, scraped thin. "I thought you'd be inside. Preparing the report. Deciding our fate." Samuel crouched beside him. "I don't decide fate alone." "That's not what it feels like," Henderson whispered. Samuel studied him. The man's exhaustion had seeped past, flesh and bone. It lived in the posture of someone who had been bracing for impact for too long. "What's the real reason you stayed?" Samuel asked softly. "Because this goes deeper than duty." Henderson let out a sharp breath, half laugh, half collapse. "Because this hospital saved my daughter when she was 8. Severe asthma. Nearly lost her. The staff back then, they treated us like family. I swore I'd give the same care to other families. I swore it." His voice cracked. "But somewhere along the way, I became the man who let someone's father wait an hour for help." "You're not that man," Margaret said gently. "I am," he insisted. "Intentions don't matter when outcomes kill people." Samuel nodded once, acknowledging the truth, without letting it define him. "And yet you carried that woman up 6 flights of stairs, when your body was telling you it had nothing left. That's not the act of a man who's given up. That's the act of a man who still remembers why he started." Henderson looked up, tears finally spilling over. "Am I going to lose my license? That isn't decided tonight," Samuel said. "But what matters more is this. Are you willing to stand in front of investigators and tell them everything, without omission, without excuses?" Henderson stared at him. "Will it save the hospital?" It might save more than that, Samuel answered. It might save you. A silence stretched long and fragile. Then Henderson nodded, slow but certain. I'll testify. Everything I know. Everything they've tried to bury. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the edges of the lot like a camera shutter. Margaret exhaled. Then we have a chance. The agents approached, then their footsteps measured. Mr. Wright, the taller one, said the department is on standby. They're awaiting your preliminary assessment. Samuel rose to his full height, the wind tugging at the hem of his coat. And they'll get it. But not before I finish the walkthrough. We've already seen the critical issues, the agent replied. You're within your authority to recommend immediate receivership. Yes, Samuel said. But authority means nothing if it ignores humanity. I need to see the night shift, the supply rooms, the morgue, the places where truth doesn't hide behind polished walls. The agents exchanged a glance, then nodded. Margaret followed as Samuel moved toward the side entrance that led to the administrative wing. Her barefoot steps from earlier had been replaced with a pair of borrowed flats, too large and slipping at the heel, but she kept pace anyway. Inside the hallway was dark, except for the glow from exit signs. A sense of abandonment clung to the walls. The administrative wing always looked pristine during the day. Tonight, stripped of noise and motion, it felt hollow. They turned into the records room. It smelled of dust and printers, the air stale, suffocating. Rows of beige cabinets stood like soldiers in formation. Margaret flicked the light switch, revealing stacks of file boxes pushed against the far wall. We digitize most patient data, she said, trying to sound composed. But budget cuts forced us to merge storage from 3 separate facilities. Samuel stepped toward the boxes, brushing dust from a label written in hurried handwriting. This one is dated last year. We never had staff to reorganize, she admitted. So everything fell behind. He opened the box. Inside were folders marked with red tabs, complaints, incident reports, requests for repairs. He pulled one out. The form inside detailed a malfunctioning crash cart. Signed. Submitted. Unaddressed. He pulled another. A nurse documenting unsafe ratios. Ignored. Another. A critical request for ventilator maintenance. Denied. Margaret felt the walls closing in. I tried to escalate these. I really did. But the board told me we were meeting benchmarks. They said I was painting a dramatic picture. Samuel's voice was quiet, but lethal. The board lied. She swallowed hard. I know that now. He closed the box, dust motes rising in a cloud that drifted through the cold fluorescent light. There's more, she said. You asked to see everything. That includes the morgue. The morgue sat at the far end of the sub-basement. A long, sterile corridor led to a door secured with a keypad. Margaret typed in a code. The door opened with a hiss. The morgue lights flickered on, cold and unyielding. Silver drawers lined the wall. A scale sat in the corner, old enough to belong in a museum. A clipboard rested on a counter beside a broken computer terminal. Samuel walked slowly, taking in the room with an expression unreadable even to the agents. How many deaths this year, he asked. Margaret's voice barely made it out. More than last year. But we're still within state averages. Samuel turned to her sharply. And how many of those deaths were preventable? She hesitated. The silence answered for her. He gestured to the broken terminal. Why isn't this replaced budget, she whispered, and the scale budget, and the staff certifications budget? The word hung in the air like a curse. Samuel leaned on the counter, his reflection staring back at him from the polished metal drawers. For a moment, he seemed to see not the hospital, not the failures, but the woman upstairs in room 12. And all the hospitals like this one she had fought to keep him alive in when he was young. Margaret stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Samuel, do you think this place deserves to be saved?" He didn't turn right away. When he did, his expression was heavy with the burden of truth. "I think the building is failing," he said. "I think the board is failing. I think the systems are failing." He paused. "But the people aren't failing. And that matters more than everything else." Margaret's breath caught a fragile hope blooming in her chest. Then Samuel added, "But hope alone won't save this hospital. It needs a reckoning. And a purge." The agent straightened at the word. "A purge," Margaret echoed. Samuel nodded. "Of corruption, of negligence, of leadership that values profit over breath." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And who leads us through that, you do?" Samuel said. "If you're willing." Before she could respond, the agent's radio crackled. A voice cut in sharply. "Command to right. Media presence growing outside. The board has been alerted and is demanding a statement." Margaret's eyes widened. "They'll fire me." Samuel stepped toward her, his presence steadying. "Not tonight. Tonight you stand with me. And what happens after tonight?" "After tonight," Samuel said, "we rebuild." The morgue lights buzzed overhead, harsh and cold, but in the reflection on the metal drawers, Margaret saw something she hadn't seen in months. Possibility. Samuel turned toward the doorcoat, stirring in the draft from the hallway. "The board wants a statement," he said. "Let's give them something they didn't expect." He walked out, leaving the morgue behind. The hospital braced for a war it had been avoiding for years. The board members arrived just after 10, their expensive sedans and tailored arrogance slicing through the storm clouds gathering over the parking lot. They swept through the automatic doors in a cluster of polished leather shoes, irritation clinging to them like the scent of cologne, too strong for the hour. Flashing cameras trailed behind reporters, calling out questions that bounced off the walls and hit the hospital lobby like shrapnel. Is it true patients were treated in storage rooms? Did equipment failures contribute to injuries? Is this hospital being taken over by the federal government? The board ignored every voice, but their tight jaws and darting eyes betrayed the panic they tried to hide. They were not accustomed to being summoned, and certainly not accustomed to being summoned by someone they didn't control. Samuel stood waiting in the lobby, coat unbuttoned now, shoulders relaxed, but a presence coiled like a held breath. Margaret stood at his right chin, high despite the fear tightening her spine. Henderson stood at his left, clearly exhausted, but for once, looking like a man willing to rise for something larger than the weight on his back. The tallest board member, Winston Kearns, moved forward first, a man with silver hair sculpted to perfection and a voice that could charm donors out of their retirement funds. He looked at Samuel with irritation sharpened into offense. "I'm Winston Kearns, chairman of the board, and I demand to know who you are and why my staff is telling me federal authorities have breached protocol by conducting unauthorized investigations." Samuel didn't blink. "You weren't summoned, Mr. Kearns. You were needed." Kearns stiffened. "Needed, I am the one who authorizes oversight in this facility." "No," Samuel said, his tone smooth as glass. "You authorize nothing. You respond to oversight. And tonight, oversight finally came knocking. A few reporters gasped. Cameras clicked wildly. Another board member, a woman with a strained smile and eyes darting everywhere, but Samuel's face stepped forward. This is extremely improper. If there were concerns, the board should have been given the courtesy of documentation. Meetings, official channels. Henderson laughed under his breath. A bitter, tired sound. Official channels haven't worked for years. Margaret shot him a quick warning glance, but Samuel did not. Kearns narrowed his eyes. "You're out of line, Doctor." "No," Samuel said, turning toward Kearns. "He's finally in line. The right one." The lobby fell quiet. Nurses watched from behind desks. Orderlies paused mid-step. Even patients being wheeled through the area slowed, sensing the shift in the air. Samuel stepped forward once, closing the gap between himself and the board. "Let's begin with simple truths. Truth number 1. You were informed repeatedly of staffing shortages that put lives at risk." The woman board member raised her chin. "We addressed staffing within budget limits." Samuel nodded slowly. "Budget limits that conveniently protected your annual bonuses." Her face drained of color. Truth number 2. Samuel continued. Critical equipment failures were reported for months. Requests for replacements sat unanswered. Why? Because you deemed repairs non-essential. Kearns snapped. "How dare you accuse this board of negligence?" "I'm not accusing you," Samuel cut in. "I'm documenting you." The reporters froze, then erupted in frantic typing. Margaret stood straighter, her anxiety transforming into something hotter. Righteousness, maybe. Or simply relief that the truth was no longer locked behind office doors. Samuel paced slowly like a professor delivering a lecture. No student dared interrupt. Truth number 3. Patients were placed in the basement diagnostic wing without proper monitoring. Not once, not twice, systematically, because you refused to approve additional beds. Kearns bristled. "That's an exaggeration." Samuel tilted his head. "Then explain the woman we pulled from a failing monitor tonight. Explain why she lay alone in a storage-level exam room without any staff assigned to that floor." A heavy silence. The board members exchanged nervous glances, caught between denial and the slow, dawning horror of being publicly exposed. Finally, Samuel said, "Truth number 4. This hospital is not failing because of lack of effort. It's failing because of lack of leadership." Margaret felt her chest tighten. Even she didn't know which direction Samuel would take next. Kearns took a step toward him. "I demand the identity of every person who authorized this circus. You will be removed immediately. I'll call the governor if I—" He stopped abruptly when 2 federal agents stepped forward, in unison, badges raised. The shorter agent spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the lobby with the crisp authority of a verdict. "The Oversight Committee acknowledges the authority of Samuel Wright, Chief Auditor of Federal Healthcare Receivership. All inquiries and objections will be directed to him." The room inhaled sharply. The words "Chief Auditor" hit like a gavel striking hardwood. Henderson closed his eyes, relief softening years of exhaustion. Margaret steadied her breath, understanding now why Samuel's presence shook the building long before his title did. But Kearns, his arrogance faltered for the first time. "Chief Auditor," he repeated, voice cracking. "You didn't identify yourself?" Samuel's tone chilled. "I wanted to see how staff and leadership treated someone they thought was nobody." A ripple of discomfort moved through the lobby. The hospital in that moment saw itself through Samuel's eyes and did not like the reflection staring back. Kearns forced a smile too tight to be sincere. "Mr. Wright, surely we can discuss this privately." "No," Samuel said, cutting him cleanly. "Transparency starts now." Margaret stepped forward, hands trembling but voice steady. "The staff deserves to hear this. The patients deserve to hear this. And I deserve to stand here." Kearns glared at her. You knew about this investigation?" "No," Margaret said. "But I should have?" Samuel nodded once. "Affirmation." The taller agent approached Samuel with a folder. "These documents are ready for review whenever you decide." Samuel didn't take the folder yet. Instead, he looked at the board. This hospital has reached a crossroads. One path leads to immediate receivership, federal takeover, departmental freezes, restructuring. The other path requires full cooperation from every one of you. Kearns swallowed. "What are you asking?" "I'm not asking," Samuel said. "I'm telling. Tonight you step aside from operational decisions. All authority transitions to the interim crisis team, led by Ms. Doyle." Margaret's body went cold. The board exploded with protest. "You can't do that. She isn't qualified. This is outrageous." Samuel raised a hand and the noise died instantly. "You failed this hospital." "She didn't." Margaret stared at him, heart pounding. "Samuel, I don't know if I can." "Yes," he said firmly. "You can, because you've been trying to save people without power. Tonight, you get power." Henderson stepped closer to her. "We'll help you, all of us." For the first time that night, Margaret believed it. Kearns sputtered, face blotched red. "This is punitive. You're destroying us." "No," Samuel said, voice like thunder, rolling low and final. "I'm saving everyone you chose to ignore." A flash of lightning illuminated the lobby windows. The storm finally broke above them. Kearns staggered back as though the world had tilted. "You'll ruin us politically, financially. You'll ruin my reputation." Samuel stepped closer, eyes burning with a truth that reached farther than the building around them. Reputation doesn't matter when the truth speaks louder than the lies that protect it. The board fell silent. Reporters held microphones closer. Staff members leaned forward, breathless. Samuel finally took the folder from the agent. "Tonight," he said, "the reckoning begins. Tomorrow, rebuilding starts." He turned to Margaret. "You're in charge now. Don't waste what people in this building are willing to fight for." Her breath trembled, but her voice did not. "I won't." And in the lobby of a failing hospital, surrounded by broken lights, exhausted staff, frightened families, and arrogant leaders stripped of their illusions, the first spark of a new future flickered to life. Rain hammered the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. As Samuel walked into the dimly lit situation room, the staff had hastily converted from a conference space. The storm outside was fierce, now wind slicing across the building, like a blade dragged slow across stone. Papers trembled on the table from each gust that forced its way through the aging window frame. The hospital felt alive, breathing in uneven, frightened patterns, bracing for whatever came next. Inside, nurses, department heads, and night shift supervisors sat in a tense semicircle. No board members, no polished executives, only the people who kept the place alive when no one else was watching. Their faces reflected exhaustion, fear, and something else, something rising, flickering, refusing to die. Hope, maybe, or the fragile beginnings of it. Margaret stood at the front, hair damp from running through rain earlier, blouse wrinkled, borrowed flats slipping at her heels. She looked nothing like a polished administrator. She looked better, real present, stripped of the pretense leadership demanded. A leader who had nothing left to hide. When Samuel entered the room, stilled, no announcement needed, no introduction. The shift in air told everyone what he had become to them in a single night, the man who could end them or save them. He closed the door behind him and stepped into the center of the room. "We have 2 hours," he said, voice steady before the department requires my preliminary ruling, receivership or probationary restructuring. A murmur rippled across the room. Margaret swallowed. Probationary restructuring, meaning we keep control. You keep control, Samuel said. If I believe the hospital leadership has the spine to rebuild what the board broke. A respiratory therapist raised her hand, then dropped it halfway, unsure. Samuel nodded to her. Speak. Her voice trembled. Does receivership mean layoffs? Receivership means uncertainty, Samuel answered. Probationary restructuring means accountability, not a punishment. A young nurse leaned forward, elbows on the table. We're all stretched thin. What does accountability even look like? Truth Samuel said. Starting now, he turned to Henderson. Doctor, tell them. Henderson stood slowly, a man who had spent years bent over by pressure, now forcing himself upright. We've been understaffed for too long. The board cut resources, claiming financial strain. But they hid the fact that they approved a 5.2% bonus increase for themselves while denying new hires. Gasps scattered across the room. A few people cursed under their breath. Henderson continued. We've lost 8 nurses this year, 4 physicians. Our equipment is failing, and we were never told why requisitions were denied. A lab technician shook her head, disbelief shading into fury. They said the state froze funding. The state didn't freeze funding, Margaret said quietly. They froze us. Every eye snapped to her. She lifted her chin voice, steadier now. I submitted reports. I begged for repairs. I told them patient safety was at risk. They called me dramatic. Said I was catastrophizing to secure a bigger budget for my department. They told me to show loyalty. I didn't push hard enough. I should have gone public. No, Samuel said, stepping toward her. You weren't wrong. You were silenced. He turned back to the staff. The board refused transparency. They manipulated numbers. They cut corners. They lied on quarterly reports. Silence boiled into anger. Finally, a paramedic spoke, arms crossed tightly. So what now? You take over. Replace us. Clean house. Samuel looked at him without blinking. No, I replace the people who caused this. Not the people holding the foundation together with their bare hands. The paramedic exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Margaret moved beside Samuel, drawing in a shaky breath. Tonight we rebuild our chain of command. We reorganize emergency response. We reassign leadership. And we do it with honesty. A veteran nurse raised her voice from the back. And what about the board? They won't go quietly. They won't have a choice, Samuel said. Not after tonight. Lightning flared against the window. Margaret turned toward the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and began writing categories: staffing, equipment, allocation, emergency workflow, overnight safety, upward reporting. The staff leaned in. Their fear didn't vanish, it transformed into determination. Samuel addressed them again. We're going to do this fast, and we're going to do it right. Tell me every problem you've swallowed. Every issue you were told not to mention. Start talking. A charge nurse spoke first. We have 2 ventilators in ICU that sound like they're dying. They've been failing calibration checks. We were told to monitor until replacement approval. That was 3 months ago. A lab tech added diagnostic machines on 3rd floor run outdated software. We have to print results and hand carry them. We lose time on every patient. A transport orderly chimed in next. Our elevators jam at night. It's not a glitch, it's weight sensors needing replacement. We file the same ticket every week. Voices began layering, gathering momentum. We need functioning crash carts. We need safer medication storage. We need more CNAs. We need a protected hotline to administration without retaliation. Henderson stepped forward, surprising them. We need mental health support, not for patients, for staff. We can't do this job broken. Heads nodded, a few eyes watered, and he added, we need to end the culture of silence. Samuel turned to him. Then tonight is your beginning. They spent 40 minutes mapping problems, not hiding them, not softening them. For the first time in years, the truth filled a room without fear of consequence. But a hospital is not saved by confession alone. It is saved by action. Samuel circled to the whiteboard. Now solutions. The storm outside slammed against the wall, thunder lifting the room like a heartbeat too big for the building to contain. Samuel pointed to each category in turn, as if conducting an orchestra. Equipment, he said. I will authorize emergency federal funds to replace every failing machine. Tonight. Not next quarter. Gasps. Staffing. We begin recruitment immediately, but until then we rebuild scheduling through cross-department triage rotation. Margaret stepped in. I'll handle approvals personally. No more waiting for people who don't walk these halls. Safety, Samuel continued. We audit every wing. We restructure security protocol. And we implement emergency monitoring checks every hour. A respiratory therapist rubbed tears from her eyes. No one's ever listened like this. No, Samuel said gently. But they will now. He moved to the final category, leadership. The room held its breath. Margaret whispered, Here it comes. Samuel looked at the staff with a gaze sharp enough to cut through years of fear. You deserve leaders who fight for you, not ones who hide behind polished numbers and empty praise. A young nurse raised her hand timidly. Who leads us now? Margaret looked at Samuel, her voice caught. He means me. No, Samuel said. I mean all of you. A crisis team. Multidisciplinary, transparent, accountable to staff, not the board. He placed her hand on the table, grounding her. And yes, she leads it. The room erupted, not with applause, but something heavier. Agreement, commitment, relief. Samuel stepped back, letting the gravity of the moment settle. Then his phone buzzed, loud in the silence. He answered. A voice from the other end spoke fast, urgent. When Samuel finally lowered the phone, his expression had shifted, hardening the way steel does before a blade is forged. He looked at Margaret, at Henderson, at the staff who had bared their souls to him. The board just called an emergency press conference outside, he said. They're blaming staff. They're blaming all of you. A nurse cursed under her breath. They're saying, Samuel continued, that the failures of this hospital are due to incompetent clinical workers and reckless administrators. Margaret's face went pale. Henderson closed his eyes, fury simmering beneath exhaustion. Samuel stepped toward the door. No more hiding in conference rooms, he said. No more lies told behind podiums. Tonight, we confront them. All of us. Samuel Margaret began. He turned his voice, low steady, the calm before a seismic shift. They wanted a stage, he said. Let's give them a reckoning. He opened the door. The storm outside roared ready, and the hospital followed him into the fire. Wind whipped through the courtyard as Samuel emerged from the side doors, the storm tossing leaves across the pavement like frantic shadows. The makeshift press conference was already underway, beneath a hastily erected canopy. Camera lights glared against the rain, illuminating the semicircle of board members standing behind a podium, draped with the hospital's logo. Their polished suits were soaked at the shoulders, their practiced smiles tight and brittle. Winston Kearns gripped the podium with both hands, leaning into the microphone, as if force could anchor the narrative slipping through his fingers. And let me be perfectly clear. Kearns said, raising his voice over the wind, the issues brought to light this evening stem from operational failures inside the clinical staff and administrative management. The board has acted responsibly at every juncture. We will not allow inaccurate portrayals to tarnish our commitment to patient care. Reporters leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Flashbulbs popped, microphones thrust closer. Kearns pressed on, spurred by his own momentum. Tonight's events have been exaggerated by individuals who do not understand the complexities of hospital governance. The board has upheld fiduciary duty. Any missteps fall squarely on procedural lapses within the hospital's internal chain of command. Behind him, several board members nodded stiffly, their eyes shifting toward the cameras, hoping their faces conveyed confidence rather than panic. Samuel stepped forward into the light. Conversations faltered. The shift was visceral, like the air thickened without warning. Reporters turned. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Samuel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority moved with him. "That is enough, Mr. Kearns." Kearns' stiffened fingers tightening around the podium edges. "Mr. Wright, this is a public statement. You are not authorized. I am the chief auditor for federal receivership." Samuel said, his voice calm, but carrying through the courtyard like a low drum. "Authorization is not your concern anymore." Margaret appeared beside him, rain dampening her hair, her blouse plastered lightly to her shoulders. Behind her stood Henderson, the nursing leads, orderlies, technicians, therapists, the night shift staff who had been invisible for years. Their presence gathered behind Samuel like a rising tide. Kearns forced a laugh that landed hollow. This is not the proper venue for federal commentary. Samuel stepped closer. Each footfall landed with deliberate quiet, the kind that felt louder than a shout. "You chose this venue when you blamed the people who have kept this hospital alive. You chose it when you lied to the public." The reporters surged forward. "Mr. Wright, are you confirming a federal probe? Is the hospital being seized? Are patients in danger?" Samuel lifted a hand. Silence settled like snowfall. Every complaint filed, every ignored requisition, every malfunctioning monitor, every understaffed shift. We have reviewed them all. The narrative presented by this board is false. Kearns moved to speak, but Samuel's next words cut through the storm. "This hospital is failing because its leadership failed it." A gasp rippled through the reporters. Margaret's breath hitched though she stood strong. Henderson bowed his head, the confirmation both painful and freeing. Samuel continued, voice steady. "Behind me stand the people who carried this hospital on their backs, while the board starved them of resources. They faced impossible odds, and still chose compassion, still chose duty, still chose patience over profit." He turned, looking at Margaret first. Ms. Doyle fought for transparency. Her reports were dismissed. His gaze moved to the nursing supervisors. These nurses worked double and triple shifts without complaint. Then, to the technicians. These technicians kept failing equipment alive, long past safe limits. Then to Henderson. This physician nearly lost himself trying to compensate for board negligence. As if on cue, thunder cracked above them, a sound that seemed to underscore the truth laid bare. And the board, Samuel said, facing Kearns again, not only ignored warnings, but misrepresented financial constraints to shield their own compensations. Tonight's failures were not accidental. They were systemic, deliberate, preventable. Kearns' face flushed with indignation. "This is slander." "No," Samuel said softly. "This is evidence." The agent handed Samuel a folder. He opened it, revealing pages of documented requests, stamped and dated, marked denied. Photos of broken ventilators, emails ignored, staffing charts with entire columns in red. The reporters angled for a closer view. Headlines were already forming behind their eyes. Samuel closed the folder. Effective immediately, operational authority is transferred to an interim crisis team. The board is relieved of its functional control pending full investigation. A roar rose from the crowd. Reporters shouted questions. The board members erupted in protest. "You can't do this," Kearns barked. "We will challenge this in court." "You will be heard," Samuel said. Under oath, the agents stepped forward, positioning themselves between Samuel and the board. Margaret took a breath, stepped up beside the podium and faced the microphones. "For years," she said, voice steady, despite the storm, we have asked for help. We were told there was no money. Tonight proves there was no will. But that ends now. A nurse behind her whispered, "You tell them just loud enough for the nearest reporter to hear." Margaret lifted her chin. "We are not broken. We are exhausted. We are fighting with tools that should have been replaced with staff. We should have been allowed to hire with truth we were told to bury. From this moment forward, we rebuild with transparency, integrity, and dignity." Her words carried a different weight than Samuel's. His were judgment, hers were renewal. Reporters became a blur of motion. The story had shifted. The board was no longer the source of truth, but the subject of scandal. The staff, once silent, now stood in collective defiance, and the hospital, battered and aching, seemed to breathe differently, no longer shrinking under shame, but expanding under possibility. Samuel placed a hand on the podium, signaling the end. "We will hold every person in this building to a higher standard. But this time the standard will begin at the top." The storm broke fully then. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching everything, washing the courtyard in a cold, cleansing cascade. The board retreated under umbrellas. Reporters ran for cover. Staff lingered, rain slipping down their faces like the release of 1,000 unspoken fears. Margaret turned to Samuel. "You changed everything tonight." "No," he said, his gaze softening as he looked toward the hospital windows glowing behind them. "The truth did." She nodded faintly. "What happens tomorrow?" "We start rebuilding," Samuel said. "Floor by floor, wing by wing, heart by heart." For the first time she believed it. He stepped back from the light's coat, heavy with rain, but posture unbowed. The agents followed. The staff drifted inside, buoyed by a sense of fragile but blooming purpose. Henderson paused as he passed Samuel, offering a nod carved from gratitude too deep for words. Samuel walked toward the entrance, the storm easing into a steady drizzle. Behind him, the hospital loomed not as a failing institution, but as a wounded one finally allowed to heal. And for those listening now, for those who saw the reckoning and the rise, if this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of the power of truth, the weight of compassion, and the courage it takes to rebuild after brokenness, then stay with us. Like the video, subscribe for more stories that honor resilience. And before you go, comment the 3 words that define change we rise together.